Aloha, my name is Gary Simon, and I'm the AARP Hawaii AARP Hawaii Volunteer State President. On behalf of AARP Hawaii and our speakers, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Build a Disaster Plan for Surviving a Hurricane. This session is the third of 4 weekly webinars we have been holding each Saturday in June to help you plan for a hurricane. Let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. This is a picture of what you should be seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen on a PC and possibly the top of the screen on an iPad. Everybody is currently on mute. If you want to submit a question or comment, please click on the button that says Q&A and type in your question. I will be monitoring the questions and making sure they get asked. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you may type your questions in the comments. We are not using the raise hand button. The chat feature can be used if you want to make a comment to everyone or to communicate a technical question to our volunteers. We recommend that you select speaker side-by-side view rather than gallery view for this presentation. Do this by clicking on the upper right part of your screen. Once you are in that view, you can change the size of the slides or of the speaker simply by clicking and dragging on the middle bar. Finally, we have added closed captioning to this presentation. For those who have difficulty hearing, you can turn this off and on your end by clicking on the CC Live transcript button in the lower right-hand side of your screen and clicking on Hide Subtitle. This is a look at what we covered the past 2 Saturdays and what we're covering today and next week. Today is preparing your home for a hurricane. Last week we had build your disaster plan. Next week will be what to do if you live in a high rise. For those of you who are not familiar with AARP, we are a nonprofit social mission organization with a membership of 140,000 people in Hawaii. We want to empower people to choose how they live as they age. Because we live in an island state, part of that means helping people to plan ahead so that they can protect their homes, their families, and themselves in the event of a natural hazard like a hurricane. Hurricanes, thank goodness, don't happen every day or every year, but they have happened, sometimes leaving total devastation in their wake, like with Hurricane Iniki. Our ability to be resilient as a community and even our very lives may depend on our ability to plan for the worst so that we can come out on the other side. And that's what we'll be talking about today. We're fortunate to have 2 extremely knowledgeable speakers today. Dennis Hwang is a faculty member of the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College program, which is part of NOAA. He is the lead author of the Homeowner's Handbook to Prepare for Natural Hazards. Since 2007, the handbook has gone through 10 print runs with over 100,000 copies. It has been adopted for 12 states, territories, and countries. He is currently working on a handbook for the Federated States of Micronesia. Jerry Silva. In 1982, Hurricane Eva took the roof off Jerry's home on Oahu. In 1992, when Hurricane Iniki devastated the island of Kauai, he was serving as the Chief of Staff of the Hawaii Army National Guard and got a close-up look at the devastation caused by a Category 4 storm. Jerry currently serves on the Hawaii Advisory Council on Emergency Management. For more than 2 decades, he has made it a personal mission to harden his home. He will share the results of those efforts with you. Please, Dennis. I hand off to you. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. And aloha, everyone. And glad you could join us today. We have a lot of information to cover. And so I'm going to go pretty quick. Can you see this, Gary?
Yes.
Okay, so here's my contact information. And after this program or during it, AARP, and we're very grateful that they allow us to give this talk and share it with Jerry Silva also. But they're going to share this PowerPoint in the form of a PDF file. So you'll have my contact information. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. But we're going to talk about preparing for hurricane season, prepare your house. And we want to do it with the Homeowner's Handbook to prepare for natural hazards. This is the 4th edition. It's available online, and I think AARP is going to share the link to where you get the free PDF. You could also get free printed copies at the Hawaii Public Library System. So all 51 public libraries around the state have copies of the book. The 4th edition now covers volcanoes and climate change, and you'll see that a lot of the measures, best practices for homes, have a resilience component, but also climate adaptation and environmentally sustainable components to it. So it makes it even more of a reason to implement some of these measures. Okay, so and when we talk about preparedness, they always say prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So our worst case scenario really is like a hurricane like Aniki. Instead of hitting Kauai, it was devastating in Kauai, but Oahu has 8 times more structures than Kauai. And if it had turned north 6 hours earlier, instead of 6,000 or 7,000 houses damaged or destroyed, it would have been 50,000. So that's something. And in terms of Aniki, I just want to cover some hurricane science. I know Leanne in week 1 covered a lot of this, but I want to cover it in terms of decisions you make for your home and your evacuation plan. So here's Aniki. It's moving north at 30 miles per hour and sustained winds of 125 miles per hour. So in the right front quadrant, the forward motion and the rotational motion add together, and you get 150 mile per hour winds. In the left front quadrant, they subtract, and you're getting 90 mile per hour winds. That's a huge difference in wind forces. It's essentially a category 4 or 5 hurricane in the right front quadrant, a category 1 hurricane on the left front quadrant. So they're even on Kauai, there's a huge difference in the impacts. And the other thing to note is Leanne talked about storm surge in week 1. So all the storm surge is occurring in the right front quadrant where the winds are blowing onto the coastline. Okay, you can see in the left front quadrant, there's no storm surge. Okay, something to keep in mind. Okay. Again, in the northern hemisphere, the winds are rotating around the eye in a counterclockwise direction. So when we have a system like Lane coming from the south, it's rotating counterclockwise. The winds are going to come first from the east, then die down, and then come from the west. Whereas if you have a system like Douglas coming from the east, rotating counterclockwise winds, the winds are going to first come from the north, then die down and come from the south. So the point is, when you retrofit or strengthen your home, you need to account for every direction. You need to protect your house, create a 360-degree envelope of protection around your house. You just can't, say, for instance, protect the side of your house that that's facing the coastline, for instance. Okay, Now I'm going to show
Excuse me,
this.
Dennis,
Yeah.
would you mind just clicking on the three dots that say more on the right, lower right, and choose hide floating meeting controls? Because we're getting a black box at the top of your screen.
Okay, let's see. What do I do?
Lower right, three dots, it says more. Choose hide floating meeting controls.
Wait, is it on the share screen?
Oh, it'll be actually be on the upper. I'm so sorry.
Okay, the three dots.
Do you see one that says hide floating meeting controls?
Yes.
Just click that.
Okay, is that better?
Not yet, but hopefully it will be. Let's give it a try. Thank you.
How's that?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So anyway, we just covered this slide, and I want to show you this example of this house in Manalani Heights in 2021. Okay, so you may say, wow, we didn't have a hurricane in 2021 or a tropical storm. How could this happen? So, sorry, advance. So what's happening on that date, there was a cold front and there were sustained winds of 20 to 30 miles per hour with gusts up to 50 miles per hour. And then here's the topographic speed up map for Oahu. That's in our building codes. And you could see that when there's topography, it could speed up the wind by up to 40%. So on that one date, you had near strong tropical storm or near hurricane speed winds in one location. So although it was only 20 or 30 miles per hour here, it was enough to damage property up here. So if you imagine, if you have a category 1 here, then you're going to get a category 2 or 3 up here. And if you have a category 2 here, you're going to get a major hurricane. It could be a 3 or 4 up here. So that's why after Hurricane Lane, they did some modeling studies that showed with topographic speed up, if Lane had hit as a category 2 on Oahu instead of veering to the west, it would have damaged 52,000 homes and caused $27 billion in damages. Okay, and then the last thing I want to point out, here's a history of tropical cyclones from 1970 to 2021, and you can see the red bars are when there's an El Nino. That's simply when the waters are warmer in the Eastern Pacific. La Nina is when the waters are cooler in the Eastern Pacific, and it shifts back and forth. But you could see during El Ninos, there's more hurricane activity. Eva occurred in 82, was an El Nino. Aniki occurred in 92, that was an El Nino. Very lucky we were in 2015 when we had a record 16 systems. That was an El Nino. And now we're in a La Nina. So the question is, when is the best time to prepare? And the answer is now, because even though the it may seem like less activity, and Douglas was what occurred in 2020 when there were only 2 systems, but it, first of all, only takes 1, and Douglas almost hit us, even with only 2 in the system in the Central Pacific. The other thing is, you know, even if it's a low period activity such as now, it is the best time to prepare is now, because the things we cover in this book, it's going to save adding hurricane clips. It's going to take you 2 or 3 months to line up a contractor. So it's not something you could do when there's an incoming watch or warning. You have to do it now. And also, even after hurricane season, even the best time is when it's off hurricane season, you know, because again, it'll take you months to line up a contractor. Okay, so here are some simple things to prepare. Again, the emergency supplies, I think Leanne Eaton covered this in week 1. Have your 14-day supply. Okay, create an emergency plan. So James Burke and Earl Kealoha covered this in week 2. You should know your hazard zone, plan for the triple threat of a hurricane, and get emergency alerts. We're going to cover this part, and then work on your house. This is what we're going to cover today also. Do some simple things first. Clear debris and junk around your yards. Clear gutters and downspouts. You want to make sure water could get off your property. You want to maintain your house. Make sure there's no wood rot, termite damage. And then the very first retrofit we recommend for houses that don't have them is to add hurricane clips as a first step. And generally, here are the threshold dates. Houses built before 1988 on Oahu, 1990 on Maui and Kauai, and 1994 for Hawaii County. If your houses were built before those dates, you probably don't have hurricane clips. That's the first thing we would have you do, and see the handbook for more. And we're going to cover window protection also, especially Jerry. You should also check your insurance coverage. We're going to cover that very briefly. And the bottom line, continuously improve and strengthen your house. You could do a little over time, maybe every year, do one simple thing. And the key thing now, I think, is to try and add hurricane clips. And then, consider that these measures could be resilient, adaptive, and sustainable. Okay, now regard to your evacuation plan, I just want to mention every house should have an emergency plan for a tsunami and a hurricane, and they're different. Okay, so here's where the tsunami evacuation maps are. Okay, and you only use the tsunami evacuation maps for a tsunami. Do not use them for a hurricane. Okay, for a hurricane, you should look at your flood maps and storm surge maps. And here's the address for the flood maps and the storm surge maps. Okay, and we're going to show you why you need to look at both. Okay, so here's an example of Wailupi Peninsula on the south shore of Oahu. Okay, and the flood map indicates the Wailupi Peninsula is okay to stay there during a hurricane. Okay, but the storm surge map indicates it's not okay to stay there. The storm surge map also indicates that it's okay to stay along the stream here, but the flood map indicates that it's not okay. That's why you need to look at both of these maps when you create your hurricane evacuation plan. So you need to know if you're in a flood zone or a storm surge zone. And even then, you still need to wait for instructions from local emergency managers, because say, for instance, this storm surge map, this is like a worst case scenario. Say, for instance, there's a hurricane like Lane coming from the south, you may get, and it's the right front quadrant is going to hit, you may get storm surge like this. But if, say, you're going to get a system like Douglas coming from the east, you won't get storm surge like this. So that's why you need to plan for these different scenarios, but then wait for instructions from local emergency managers. Okay, and then also each county has an app where you could get emergency alerts. They'll send you text messages or on your smartphone. And for Oahu, it's hnl.info, and you could see the similar information for Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii County. I'm not going to go spend time on that very much. You could look at, again, at the PDF we provide you. That's where you get your emergency alerts. Okay. Now, once you determine that you're not in a flood zone and you're not in a storm surge zone, you still need to determine if your house is strong enough for the wind. So here's the ability to shelter in place table during a hurricane. This is in the homeowner's handbook. Okay, so there's 3 rows. Okay, remember that story about the 3 little pigs? House made of straw, wood, and stone. Well, here you have a single wall house, double wall house, and a stone house. Okay, so naturally the stone house is going to be the strongest, then the double wall house, then the single wall house. And on the bottom row, you have unsafe, marginal, good, better, and best. Okay, so how you use this table, you first determine where your house is. Are you single wall, double wall, or stone? Say a single wall house. The goal is to move your house to the right using the concepts in the homeowner's handbook. Okay, so you want to make sure if your house in poor condition, put it in good condition. And the very first thing we ask you to do is put in hurricane clips. And if you do these things and even do some window protection, you may be all right for a tropical storm or a Category 1. Okay, we could only strengthen a single wall house so much. Okay, so if it's like a 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, it may be better to go somewhere else, but that's what you need to plan for. And you may say, well, why do I even want to strengthen my single wall house if it's only good for a Category 1? And the reason is a tropical storm is 15 times more likely in a Category 1, and a Category 1 is 15 times more likely than a Category 2. Or so, and if you multiply it, a tropical storm is 225 times more likely than a Category 2. So when you do these simple retrofits, you're making it more likely that you'll be able to shelter in place for some of the simpler, for some of the stronger, or some of the threatening storms, but not necessarily for a major 2 or 3, but which are less likely to happen. Okay, so in our work at Sea Grant, when there are major hurricanes hitting on the mainland, a lot of times we go check some of the damages and try and determine what we could learn. And you could see, we see this off time and time again. Okay, this is a house in St. Charles Parish hit after Hurricane Ida. The top one is one house, and the bottom one is another house on the same block. And we see this all the time. There's a huge difference in built house performance on how the house is built. Okay, and in the same block, you could see this picture in the top half. A month later, it looks like there was not even a hurricane on that block, but on a house on the same block in the bottom, you could see the tremendous damage from water infiltration. We're going to cover that. Okay, and then same thing for Hurricane Harvey in 2017 in Texas, hit as a Category 4. Here's a block, and you could see 4 numbers. 4 is major damage, 4 is destroyed, 3 major damage, 2 minor damage or moderate damage, 1 is no damage. Okay, so out in the field, destroyed house, major damage, moderate damage with the damage along primarily the edge of the roof, and then no damage. So the bottom line is, how come there's such a difference in how these houses perform? And the reason is, this house was built 3 months before Harvey with modern building codes. It had a continuous load path connection, a strong roof, and window protection. So these are the things that we're going to encourage you to put in your house, and they're covered in the homeowner's handbook. And the other thing too is, again, here's why you want to try and retrofit, because if you're trying to stay in your house, say when there's a system, you don't want to shelter in place and have your house collapse on you, like some of these examples, this example. Okay, so what's a continuous load path connection? It's essentially tying the roof to the foundation, and it's done internally through the building codes. Here you have a roof, and it's tied to the wall through these hurricane clips. Okay, and this is generally the weakest connection in the house. And then you have straps tying the second floor to the first floor, and then you have a strap tying the stud to sill plate, and the sill plates tied down with an anchor bolt. So this is what a continuous load path connection is. It's almost like you're throwing a chain over the roof of your house and tying it down to the ground, but it's internal through the building codes. But if your house is not built with modern building codes, you could try and do it as a retrofit And here, all the connectors are on the outside of the house. Okay, here they're on the inside of the house when you build it. As a retrofit, they're on the outside of the house. Okay, so in Hawaii, there are houses with no hurricane clips, no load path, no window coverings. And then there are hurricane clips, houses with hurricane clips. And then here are the threshold dates for Oahu, Maui, and Kauai, and Hawaii. And this was caused by a building code change after Hurricane Eva in '82. And then after Aniki in '92, there was another round of building code changes, which required a continuous load path connection. And here are the threshold dates for the different islands. And then now under the modern building codes, it requires a continuous load path connection with hurricane clips and window protection or a safe room. Okay, so again, here's why you want to tie your roof to the wall. Here's examples of houses, the roof blowing off in Aniki. Here's one house, a different house, and we saw that even last year, a house, the roof blowing off in Manalani Heights. Okay, so tie your roof to the wall. That's the first thing we recommend. Okay, if you're handy, you could do it 2 Saturdays, and it'll be $300 in material cost. If you're not handy, hire a licensed contractor. Okay, and here's a common hurricane tie made specifically for Hawaii, and this is called the Hawaii plantation tie. There's a step-by-step guide of how to install that in the homeowner's handbook. So if you're handy, again, you could try and put them in. And we do recommend you seek the initial advice of a licensed engineer, structural engineer, or architect first. Okay, in between the HPT clip and the H3 and the HM9, almost every house in the state can be relatively easily retrofitted with hurricane ties. And we think about 6,000 or 7,000 houses have been retrofitted. Okay, the other thing, I'm going to cover this one real quick. A lot of houses in Hawaii are on post and pier structures such as this, and all the connections are by friction. So there's no actual metal connectors, and during an earthquake or a hurricane, they could be knocked off their block. So in the handbook, we have a step-by-step guide on how to do a post and pier retrofit. And you can see some of the steps, and essentially you could see the final product here. You're tying the post and pier to the concrete block here. Okay, so the bottom line is that this one example of this single wall house, it now has a continuous load path, even though it was built in 1956. All the trusses and rafters are connected to the wall. All the posts and piers are connected to the concrete blocks. And also there was insurance discounts, $1,200. The initial hurricane insurance premium went from $1,200 to $900. And it also adds value to the house, okay? The other thing I want to mention, I'm going to cover this real quick because Jerry's going to cover it, is you need to protect the envelope of your house with window protection. If there's a breach, it's going to cause internal pressurization. More likely your roof will blow off. Do not use masking tape. Do not open your windows, okay? Here's some different types of hurricane protection. This is where Sea Grant is located, the National Weather Service. They have roll down shutters. The Board of Water Supply uses hurricane fabric during Douglas. Here's plywood, which is cheap and readily available, but heavy, and polycarbonate panels. Jerry's going to cover more of this shortly. Okay, and you could use these Simpson strong panel screws to attach, help you attach plywood or polycarbonate panels. That's also covered in the book, and some instructions on how to install, how to use those storm panel screws if you're going to use plywood or polycarbonate panels. The bottom line is you want to put the fasteners into the structural framing of a window. Here's accordion shutters. And then the one last thing I'm going to talk about windows is one thing that's expensive, but it's always in place, is impact resistant windows. This is what they have in Florida. And essentially, it passes a large missile test for both the window and the window frame. It's tested as one unit, and this has the advantage of that it's resilient. It'll hold, protect the envelope, but also it's climate adaptive and sustainable because it will help dampen sound. It'll block harmful UV radiation, and reduce solar heat gain, so it'll make the house cooler, and it also open view planes. So this is one example, and there are 5 in the book of measures that were put in the book that have a resilience, adaptation, and sustainability component. Okay, and again, here are the different types of window protection that are covered in the book. The trade-off is cost versus time to deploy. Plywood takes the most time to deploy. Impact-resistant windows take the least. They're always in place, but it's the most expensive. The bottom line too is you don't need to do all of one measure for all of your windows. It's possible to do one thing for the first floor and something else for the second floor. Okay, roofing is very important. Okay, so whenever there's a hurricane, there's always increased pressure and forces on the corners and edges of the roof. And you can see here's Kapoho area after Tropical Storm Iselle, and you can see damage being initiated at the corner of the roof. And then here, another house, damage being initiated at the edge of the house. Okay, so here are different types of roof damage. This is from Louisiana after Hurricane Ida last year. The roof may blow off. That's why you add the hurricane clips or the hurricane ties, the roof to wall. The plywood deck could come off the trusses, and we're going to cover that. And the shingles could blow off. We're going to cover the impact of that. And then there are some other minor damages that could occur, and could be found. That's covered in our Hurricane Ida report that's on the Homeowners Handbook website. Okay, but in terms of the roof deck blowing off the trusses or blowing off the trusses, we recommend, and we don't recommend people just do this right away because roofing is one of the more expensive retrofits, but a lot of people do re-roof naturally when the roof has reached the end of its useful life, or people put in solar. Before they put in solar, they generally re-roof, and this is the chance to do some of these measures. But if you do re-roof, make sure you attach your plywood deck to the trusses using ring shank nails. That's in the Homeowner's Handbook and our Hurricane Ida report. Okay. Also, here shows what happens when shingles blow off. Okay, when shingles blow off, you can see light penetrating the joint in between the plywood deck on the roof, and that leads to water infiltration. And here's a house that had water infiltration simply because the roof shingles blew off. Okay, so the water leaked in and then flowed along the ceiling and then dripped down the edges, and essentially everything needed to be removed. And not everything. Generally, when they have water infiltration, they remove the porous items that cannot be dried out within 24 hours. So you're looking at insulation, drywall, carpeting. These are all examples. The houses behind them look okay, but they had water infiltration. Okay, and so in the handbook and also the Hurricane Ida report, there's measures to create a sealed roof to prevent water infiltration. Okay, then here's a example. You apply this modified bitumen layer along the edge of the roof. Okay, and then there's also some tips for fastening shingles with extra strength along the weak parts where there's extra forces along the corners and edges of the roof, say by adding extra asphalt cement. Okay, solar, there's tips for solar. Okay, so we encourage people to put in solar. If you do, though, you need to make it resilient. You want to make sure it stays on your roof, and there's tips to deal with that. But also there's tips for climate adaptation or reducing the carbon footprint. if you put in solar, think about oversizing your solar for an electric car. It'll increase your cost maybe 25%, but double your savings. And then solar panels could actually make your roof stronger and also reduce heat gain on your roof. So there's resilience, adaptation, and sustainability components to solar. The next to last thing is trees. When you have trees, make sure you don't have any limbs overhanging the roof of your house. Thin the tree so that doesn't act like an umbrella and blow over. Make sure if you're planting the tree that it's a distance greater than the height of a full-grown tree away from your house. Okay. Insurance, we recommend every house in Hawaii have hurricane insurance. You know, I think my house is pretty strong, but I still have hurricane insurance because there's always residual risk. Okay. We recommend flood insurance if you have risk of flooding. Say you're in an A zone or a coastal V zone, or you have any history of flooding in the past, get flood insurance. And they are different. If you get water damage from the top down, that's hurricane insurance. But if you're getting water damage from the ground up, that's flood insurance. Okay, last thing for hurricane insurance, really, it's important. Most insurance companies give you discounts for the retrofits, roof to wall 10%, windows 15 to 18%, wall to foundation 10 to 12%. And it's cumulative. So supposedly if you do all three of them, you could get up to 40% off your hurricane insurance. So it's a great deal. And I think that's it for now. Now, Gary, I could either take questions or we could
Sure.
do the polls. Yeah.
We do have a number. One was from early on, from Ken Thomas. Can anything be done to windows of a house from the inside if you cannot reach the windows from the outside to put up boards? Thank you.
Okay. Generally, almost all the measures have the window protection from the outside. But if you have concern about reaching windows on the second floor of your house, that's when you may consider doing some other measures. Like there's some colonial shutter or Bahama shutters that are to the side of the house and easy to fold in during from the outside during an event. Or if another option is to do impact resistant windows, but generally it's very difficult to do window protection from the inside of your house. Yeah.
Okay, you had gone through this, but it bears worth repeating. From Rishin Sato, what is a load path connection?
Okay, yeah. Again, it's in that it's in one of the slides we showed, but essentially ties the roof all the way down to the foundation. And the load path means that at each part of the path, each major intersection in the house, there's a connector that carries the load from, say, the roof to the wall, to the first floor, to second floor, to the first floor, to the foundation. It's like it's essentially tying your roof to the foundation. Okay, and it's specifically in one of the slides that we showed you. Yeah. Okay. And again, if you have questions more, just contact us. Yeah.
Okay, from Chris Smartcan. Our house is 30 years old, single wall with hurricane clips. Is it beneficial to add more clips to strengthen, or will it weaken the structure?
It won't weaken the structure, but you should also determine if the clips are in good condition. You want to make sure there's been no corrosion of your clips and they're properly installed. If you do have everything in place, that's good. And then you may want to consider something else like window protection or your foundation upgrade. Yeah.
Okay, from Francine Roby. When you discuss fasteners for window covering, please add those with thin single wall homes 5/8 inch. I'm not sure if, I'm just reading verbatim. When you discuss fasteners for window covering, please add those with thin single wall homes.
How about how to add those?
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure you're talking about the thickness of the panel, but in the handbook, and I can't give you specific specific numbers now, but in the handbook, there's specific guidance on what type of fasteners you should use, and generally you should have like a 2-inch for a single wall house. It's a little different. Okay, it's a little trickier for a single wall house, because usually in a double wall house you put it into the studs or the structural framing of the house. So for a single wall house, you may have less options. And I think one of the things that people have been doing for single wall houses, they've been putting either in something called hurricane storm panels or corrugated panels, and they have rows above and below the window. And another option is some impact resistant windows, like instead of, if you have like jalousies for your single wall house, you could replace it with a 2-hung louver type system with impact resistant windows. And again, very hard to give you specific information for your house. If you have any questions, email me and send me pictures of your house. We'll try and get you started. Yeah.
Okay. We have window film on our sliding doors that were installed by a tinting company. Is that sufficient?
Window film is one method to strengthen your windows, but it won't. You got to make sure that the film is sufficiently strong, and they attached it specifically strong enough to your frame, because whenever they do window testing, they test both the window and the frame as one unit. Okay, so it won't pass, window film won't pass the large missile test, but if it's attached properly to a strong enough frame, it'll pass the small missile test. So again, I would need to look at your house and see what type of film they put in and how it was attached to your frame. Okay.
Okay. From Sophia, why is taping not an option?
Okay, taping is not an option because if there's any windborne debris, it's just going to break the window. It doesn't add any strength to the window, and it could give your homeowner a false sense of security. Instead of small pieces shattering and possibly injuring the inhabitants of a house, it'll be like larger pieces that could be shattering and causing debris in your house. It's essentially, it's not going to hold the window, the envelope.
Okay, from Proud Grandma 808, are ring shank nails required by code?
Oh, they are. I do not think they're required by code. That's something that should be considered in the updates to the building codes, and we do have some suggestions for updates to adding to the building codes. Based on our work for Hurricane Ida in Louisiana. But I would recommend that if you do get a chance to re-roof your house, you do use ring check nails.
Okay. From Evelyn Hine, do you have lists of contractor company names who specialize in retrofit work?
Contact us again. But also, if you look at the homeowner's handbook, there's an acknowledgments page, and there's around 30 partners in the book. A lot of them are state and county agencies, but a lot of them do hurricane retrofit work and also window protection. So again, if you need more guidance, give me a call. I won't name anyone's in particular now, but look, it's on page 2 of the acknowledgements page of the book. Yeah.
Okay, from Stan Fujiyama, should PO panels be turned off?
PO panels. Could he, I'm not quite sure what he means by plywood panels?
It says it should uppercase P period, uppercase O period, panels be turned off. Okay, if he can, Mr. Fujiyama, if you can clarify in the Q&A, we'll be happy to see if we can answer it. I'll move on to the next question from Donna Shimazu. Should you pre-paint clips with primer and paint before installing?
Yes, because it's going to make it easier to install. I would, and again, there's specific guidance in the handbook on the sequence of priming and painting the clips, and then and then installing. Okay, and it doesn't hurt to do it before and after too, because a lot of times you may put the proper coatings on, and then some of it may come off, like when you're attaching some of the fasteners, because a lot of times there's vibration. So, yeah.
Okay, we have a clarification from Mr. Fujiyama. Should PV panels be turned off?
PV panels. Okay. Probably. I mean, I would talk to your solar installer to see if they recommend turning off the panels. We didn't really mention if the panels should be turned off or not, but that's something you may want to ask your installer. Okay, but in the book we do have information on how they should be properly attached to your roof and where they should be properly placed on your roof.
Thank you, Dennis. Great questions. Thank you for the engagement, participants. And with that, you have answered all the questions for now. Jerry Silva, please launch your PowerPoint and take it away. Okay, Jerry, we got your screen. You're on mute, Jerry. Unmute. Okay.
Okay, we should be good there. It's
All right.
always great to be on the agenda with Dennis, because every time I hear him, I learn even more. Bottom line, though, is I can't recommend strongly enough getting a copy of that homeowner's handbook. As Dennis said, you can get it online. You can get it at libraries. It is basically the Bible if you're going to do retrofitting here in Hawaii. Now, as Gary said earlier, I'm in this because of my experience, and that was Hurricane Eva. When Hurricane Eva hit, I thought there might be some damage, but what the heck? It's only a category 1. How bad can that be? And besides, when you took a look at the path, it passed about 150 miles from my home. So if it's going to be that far away, do I have to worry? I didn't think so, but I was wrong. Hang on just a second. This is my roof in Kaneohe the day after Eva hit. Most of it's gone. But since then, I decided that no matter what, after the experience of living for basically about 5 weeks with no power, with no roof, with nothing, I told myself, we're just not going to do this again. So I did take the time and I spent a little bit of money to ensure that, let me move this. Just trying to move the toolbars out of the way.
We don't see them on our end, Jerry.
Okay, and just get this out of the way. Of course, the first order of business after that was to put in a more resilient roof. And that wasn't all that hard because the original contractor had done such a poor job on my original roof that I was able to get a decent roofer to come in and upgrade my roof. But later on, in 1995, after Hurricane Iniki, I had a major remodel done on my home. And that's when the hurricane clips went in. That's when the straps went in to ensure that I had a continuous load path. And while the contractor was there, I paid him some extra money to cover or to build covers for all of my windows. And these were all plywood covers. I covered every one of my 20 windows in the house, 10 upstairs, 10 downstairs, as well as covering for my patio door. What I didn't do at that time was do anything about my garage door. And that's important, and we'll talk about that a little later. The key thing here is that when you start to think about what you're going to do when a hurricane comes, you're going to have to go somewhere. You're going to have to go somewhere to ensure that you are safe as the storm hits, and actually that you can survive and continue your life after the storm leaves. So where do you go? Well, the bottom line is there are shelters that we have here in Hawaii, but as this slide shows, we only have enough shelter space for about 35% of our population. The thing there means that you're going to have to go probably someplace other than a public shelter. And that could be your home, or it could be the home of a friend or a relative who has a house that's going to withstand the buffeting from a hurricane. Two things that I want to make clear. If you go to the Hawaii Emergency Management's website and you take a look at their hurricane planning, they tell you right up front that storm shelters, primarily schools, should be used as a last resort for visitors and residents. Last resort. They also talk about the fact that whenever possible, you should plan on sheltering in place in your home, home of a family, friends, outside the hazard areas. And Dennis covered that really, really thoroughly. And finally, as the guidance says, you really need to refer to the homeowner's handbook to prepare for natural disasters for more information. I can't stress that enough. So How bad is it? If you live in the country, it's probably even worse because you have older homes, you have fewer public buildings. So probably you are going to want to shelter in place. And this is some of the guidance that I can provide you with. First of all, for the fourth and continuing time, get the handbook for preparing for natural hazards. I can't emphasize that strong enough. So we're going to talk about keeping the building envelope intact, and Dennis has touched on this. We've already talked about masking tape, why that doesn't work, but we are going to talk about polycarbonate. We'll talk about how to measure the panels, size the panels, and most important, attach the panels. Building envelope. Okay, building envelope, that's your roof, your walls, everything that's exposed to the weather. And you want to keep that intact. If you do, this is what the pressure looks like on your home. But once you breach that, once you cut a hole in that enclosure, then you've got some real problems, because not only do you have pressure from the outside on your building, you've got pressure from the inside. So you're going to have a situation where your roof is being pushed outward from inside the house. This, again, let me re-emphasize, this is really critically important. When you're trying to make that decision as to where to go, take a look at the pluses and minuses of a single wall house, a double wall house, and if you are in a concrete, a CMU house, how well that's going to serve. So when you select the place where you're going to weather the storm, take a look at the different options. Now, clearly, the concrete CMU house at the top is got a lot going for it. And if you have hurricane clips on, better yet. If you have window protection, still better yet. However, if all the places you have are double walled, well, let's see what we have down here. A double wall house with hurricane clips will do pretty well for you. If you have window protection, even better. So as you make those decisions, take a look at how your potential shelter is built. So just a quick question, which of these is most likely to cause the most damage to your house? And basically, it's the loss of your roof. There are other failures that certainly need to be considered, but you need to keep your roof on. Why? Well, depending on what happens, if your front door blows out, you're going to have an opening of about 20 square feet. If your picture window fails, you're going to have an opening that's probably twice the size of your front door, or a patio, or if you have a double car garage, if that goes, you're going to have an opening 100 square feet wide, and the sudden burst of wind coming through that big opening is going to do a lot of damage inside the house and maybe even to your roof. Dennis covered this pretty well, so we're just going to kind of skip through this. And he also talked about this. As you take a look at each one of your options, there's a cost, but there's also the time to deploy. And the impact-resistant windows are in place, and they're good to go as soon as that storm hits. As you work further down the chain of options, you come to plastic honeycomb panels, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And they are probably a better option than plywood is. But if all you have is plywood, then all you have is plywood. As Dennis said, there are a lot of options to impact-resistant glass, not only during a storm, but even during your normal day-to-day living. But what we're going to spend time on now is going to be the polycarbonate panels. This is one on the right side of my home. So what does it take to install these panels? And why should you do that? First of all, polycarbonate is light. It's 25% the weight of a comparable plywood panel. The major thing is it lets light in. You know, if you do plywood, and I did plywood for a number of years, once the panels go up, you may as well be living in a cave because no light comes through. But polycarbonate is stronger. Dennis talked about the small missile impact and everything. It will withstand, polycarbonate will withstand a beating that plywood will not. And furthermore, polycarbonate's not damaged by termites or rot. It does cost a bit more. As of yesterday, when I priced this, a 4x8 sheet of polycarbonate costs about $150. A sheet of 5/8 ply about $83. So that's something to consider. In either case, you've got to find a place to keep these things when they're not in use. And for most of us, that's in our garage. In my case, I've got a storage rack that bolts to the ceiling of my garage, and that's where my stuff stays when it's not in use. Polycarbonate, what's it like? Well, on the upper picture over there, you see a cross section of the polycarbonate panels, and they're honeycomb. They're 5/8 thick. They're very, very light. And if you need very large panels, they have what's called an H bracket. And you can take the panels on the left and the right, and you can plug them together in the H bracket to make very large sheets of window protection. So what's your goal here? Your goal, once you decide to go with anything, is how firmly are you going to anchor those panels to your home, to the framing of your home. As Dennis points out in his book, you know, windows have framing, and you definitely want to attach your shutters, whatever, your protection to that framing. All windows have framing, whether it's a single wall, double wall, whatever, and you've got to attach your panels to that framing. What we recommend are these storm panel screws, or they're called hanger bolts. But basically, what they are screws that have a wood screw portion over here, which is about 2 inches, and you've got to get as much of this into the framing as possible. Once it's in there, then this part protrudes. And what you do there is you cut holes in the polycarbonate and you slide it over the machine screw part of those panels. You've got to find that framing. And there's several ways to do it. And I won't get into this, but all 4 sides of the window's interior have to be addressed. You've got to be able to drill those toggle bolts into the framing of the house, into those 2x4s. And back, actually, you know, a 2x4 isn't 2 inches by 4 inches. It's about 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So you've got a very narrow target that you've got to use to attach those toggle bolts to the framing of the house. This is my house right now, and it's still a work in progress. As you can see on the bottom, there are plywood panels, and these are panels that I had a contractor build for me, and he did a really good job. They were all I had, and there were initially 10 of these covers downstairs and 10 of these covers upstairs. Now, the key thing about plywood is it's heavy, and to take as much as possible, I wanted to make sure that my priority for the polycarbonate was the higher up windows and the larger windows. So here you can see the polycarb on the upper story, and you can also see plywood on accessible windows on my upper story. And at this point, it's a work in progress. I now have polycarbonate for all of my windows. So what's it take to install this? Well, first of all, this is expensive stuff. So one, you want to make very sure that you have sized the panels correctly. You find instructions in the homeowner's handbook, and you'll also find them on the instructions that come, the manufacturer's instructions that come with the panels. But measure carefully, mark the outside corners of the sheets, and then drill the pilot holes. Now, the panels themselves don't just cover the windows. They cover a little bit of space beyond that as well. But as you look at the panels, remember, you can't see those panels. They're covered. They're covered by your siding or whatever they are. So you've got to be very, very careful in terms of locating them. And initially attaching them to the walls. So measure very carefully, lay the panel out, and make sure that you put in lines where your screws are going to go, along the sides, along the top, along the bottom. You can use the dimensions in the homeowner's handbook, or in this case over here, I've used the manufacturer's instructions, which fundamentally tell me that I need to have no more than 1.5 inches from the line where my screws are to the outside edge of the panel. But the bottom line here is follow the directions in the homeowner's handbook as you prepare these panels. And if you have the manufacturer's specs, those probably are a better guide. When you're ready to cut them to size, the biggest thing is have a circular saw with a finishing blade. You don't want something that's used for coarser work. Use a Sharpie to determine where these holes are going to be. And when you're done with that, you're going to have to enlarge the panels because you want to make sure that the panels themselves fit over the screws that you've already attached into the wall. And for this to enlarge those holes, we use something called a step build set, which allows you to gradually increase the size of those holes in the panels so that you can get them to exactly the right size. Pilot holes. You know, you can't see the framing in your house. So what you want to do is before you try to attach the storm panel screws, that you drill pilot holes in each one of these areas. You drill the holes through the polycarbonate and into the framing. You want to make very sure that you do this right, because if you try to put the storm panel screws in without pilot holes, you could split the framing of your home, and that's not going to do you any good. So recommend using pilot holes, and then after that's done, making sure that your polycarbonate panels are big enough to accommodate the storm panel screws, and then I think you're good to go. How far should these go in? And that's critical too. Now, the storm panel screws need to go into the studs, into the framing around your windows. And that means that you want to get these as far in as possible. You know, you have probably covering, you definitely have siding for your home. You want to make sure it gets through the siding and gets through the framing of the windows. And those pilot holes that are drilled out need to be probably about 3/4 of the diameter of the screws. So for a 1/4 inch screw, you're not going to need a 3/16 inch pilot bit. Once again, the manufacturer's instructions are a really good guide as to how far you need to embed these screws. As you can see here, you know, when the panel was laid out, we've marked it with a Sharpie to ensure that we know exactly where the holes need to be drilled. While you're doing this, you need to make sure that the panels don't move. And in the book, Dennis talks about using duplex nails. And those duplex nails are really good. Once you've got the panels aligned with the framing and everything else, keep them in place with those duplex nails while you drill through the holes, the pilot holes, and the holes in the panels that are going to hold the panels in place. You want to make sure that that's done right. So when you're ready to install, select a lag screw, hanger bolt, whatever you're going to do, and attach the panels to the framing. Now, you know, if this is a one-time deal, you probably use lag screws. They'll hold it. But if you think you're going to have to install and uninstall and reinstall and everything, then it's probably a good idea to use the hanger bolts, because once they go in, they stay in. And at that point, you're going to be able to put them on when you need them, take them off, and store them when you don't need them. If you do this too many times, the problem is you're going to weaken the framing. This is just enlarging the holes to make sure that they can go over, or the bolts, the hanger bolts, fit through the panels. A quick review again. And considerations in attaching the panels. Well, you need to know exactly what kind of walls you have. There's a big difference in installing these things in CMU concrete versus double wall. And this is what we recommend in terms of so here you see the storm panel screws that have been attached to the framing of my home. And these are the specs for that. You're going to have to enlarge the holes just to make sure that you can fit the panels over the storm panels, over the hanger bolts. So this is a finished product. The hanger bolts have been installed. The polycarbonate has been fitted over them, and then they're attached with wing nuts. And as I said, for the very large pieces, like my picture windows in the front, 2 of the polycarb sheets have been joined together with this H bracket to ensure that we can cover the big areas. One last thing, it's very, very important, and that's your garage door. As I said, that garage door has about 100 square feet. And if that goes in there, you're going to have a sudden burst of wind that could really do some damage, to include not only damage to your garage, but damage to your roof. So when you're going to do this, the first thing that you need to do when you're working on your door is disconnect the door opener. You don't want that door to go up and down while you're working on it. And you're saying to yourself, well, yeah, I've disconnected the power plug from my garage door, so what can happen? Well, that works unless you have a battery backup, and you don't want the battery backup moving the door while you're working on the reinforcements. This is a door that's been reinforced. As you'll notice, there are 2, basically these are structural aluminum posts that have been installed, and they're attached up at the top to the header beam that goes across, and they're also attached on the bottom. So on the top, you can see there's a bolt, a U-bolt that goes directly into the header at the top. The bottom, it's attached using machine screws that have been drilled into the concrete. And finally, once you've fortified your garage door, make use of that floor space you have there. For me, it's a place to store my containers, the refuse containers, the green waste containers, the recyclable containers. And since they've got nothing else to do at that time, you can also use them to store water that you're going to be used for toilet flushing and everything else. So this has been really quick. If anything, the message is this: protect the openings in your home. You've got lots of options there. One of those that seems to work fairly well is use of the polycarb panels. Go to the homeowner's handbook and it'll show you exactly how to do that. So at this point, that takes care of it for me. Gary?
So thank you, Jerry. We have a number of questions. Dan Turner asked if you can show a picture of a hanger bolt.
Oh, sure. Hang on a second. This is it. Simpson calls them storm panel screws, but these are hanger bolts. As you can see here, this is the side that goes into your framing. Back that up a bit. This is the side that goes into your framing. And once you've got it embedded in the framing, this side over here is going to protrude. And that's where you attach your polycarb. The polycarb fits over this part of the hanger bolt. And then the wing nuts fit over that. But whether you call them storm panel screws or you call them hanger bolts, they're basically the same. The good thing about the storm panel screws is they come in sets of 25. So you basically get 25 pilot screws for pilot holes. You get the hanger bolts, you get the wing nuts, and you get the covers, because when these things are not in use, these plastic covers go over the machine screw side, which means that if you brush up against them, you won't skin your knees, skin your arms, Gary.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I had frozen up for just a bit. I have a question from Donna, but it's more for me, and the answer is for everyone. Will we get access to a recording of this presentation? At the end of our 4-part series, we'll be emailing the link to our recordings to all participants for all 4 parts of our webinar series. Jerry from Francine Roby, has any data been collected on expected neighbor island shelter demand?
Is that for anyone, Gary?
Yeah, I think Jerry's frozen up again. So go ahead, Dennis.
There is data on shelter island demand for each county. I've seen it like 5 years ago. I haven't seen it recently. I mean, it would, if you really want to try and get a hold of it, you could try and contact the Hawaii County Civil Defense to see if they'll get it to you. But the bottom line is there are probably going to be some shelter shortages. So that's why you want to try and plan. Try and shelter in your house if you can, by strengthening your house. And then if you can't, try and go to a friend's or relative's house. Like a perfect example is like, you may live in a house built in the 50s or 60s, but your son may be in a house that's built in 2010. Go to his place.
Okay.
Or a high-rise building. Yeah.
We have a comment from Francine again that might bear a comment from either or both of you. Francine Roby says, I'm still seeing Hawaii County agencies telling people and with handout materials to tape windows and crack open windows during hurricanes. Any comment, Dennis?
Yeah, they've been circulating some of that material. That's older material. That's like been in circulation at least 10 or 20 years. And I should, that's really not what anyone thinks anymore. I mean, every guide you hear says don't tape your windows. It's really not, first of all, it's a lot of effort to put up and a lot of effort to take down, and it's really not going to protect your windows. And then in terms of protecting people from in the inside, it's going to be just as dangerous, because instead of like small pieces of glass flying around, you're going to have large pieces of glass flying around. You really want to hold the envelope so nothing gets in your house. Really, I mean, if you've seen pictures of Hurricane Iniki and pallets flying through the air, you're going to know there's no way a window with tape on it is going to protect that envelope of the house. Your goal is to have no wind and rain inside your house.
Okay, another question from Francine Roby. It seems hard to get materials shipped here. Do any home supply chains carry the window protection panels?
Jerry can answer that.
Yes, well, let's put it this way, on Oahu, yes, and that would be Hardware Hawaii. That's where I got mine from. And I keep searching around for alternatives, and frankly, I haven't found any. I've even gone to the big box stores that carry them on the mainland, and they're not inclined to send them out here. So at this point, Hardware Hawaii is the only source I know of. I don't know whether they would be open to shipping them to the Big Island. But you might talk with the management of HPM over there to see if they could help you out.
Yeah.
Okay, we had Jerry, you had to address sheltering. Chris Marcan has a scenario. A Category 2 hurricane is coming towards us and our house is not protected enough. Shelters are full and we are not certain if any friends are better off. What should we do? Jerry?
Let me understand that again. Shelters are full. Wow. Well, you really don't have much of a choice. It's a matter of a quick inventory of your home, your family's homes, your friends' homes, maybe even the place where you work if it's in a high-rise building. But that's a pretty bad scenario. Your comment, Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, that's why you plan ahead, because you got to think of you know, all possibilities. And again, a family, you know, like your sons, or if you have a relative, that would be good, but you would need to know their house, like when it was built and what they've done. If it's you would be guided by the shelter in place table to know how strong an alternative house is. But as a last resort, well, and then besides that, there's high rises, because remember the Three Little Pigs story, straw, wood, and stone, all high rises are made out of stone. So you're going to be in good shape if you could go find a stone building. It could be a condominium. Maybe you work in a concrete building, and you could get permission to go there. And then, as a last resort, go to a emergency shelter, because the bottom line is they're not going to turn anyone in, and you know, it may be uncomfortable. It may be the guidance for spacing of like one person every 10 square feet may not be met, but it's going to be safer than being in a building that you're not comfortable with going to. So, you know, those are things to consider. You know, your last resort though is a public emergency shelter, because it'll be uncomfortable. But you know, if that's all you could go to, that's where you're going to have to go to.
Okay. Jerry, well, David DeWitt asks, will polycarb work over jealousy windows?
Yes. You know, the windows are going to be closed, but yes. Some of my windows, the upstairs windows, are jealousies, and polycarb works just fine.
Okay. Margaret Siemba asks, is there information about shipping container homes?
Shipping. You mean shipping modular container homes? Is that
Using the containers as a home.
Oh, I don't think anyone has thought about that. You know, I mean, it may be possible, but I'm not aware of anyone who's thought about that right now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're nearing the end on the questions. From Holly Sullivan. So assuming you have a bathtub, is that where you go? if no options and a hurricane is hitting? If no bathtub, like many structures here, is a shower a possibility?
Well, it would generally, again, use that shelter in place table, you know, single wall house, like concrete, a stone or concrete house is best than a double wall, than a single wall house. And then you don't want to go into a single wall house that's hasn't been retrofitted if there's there's going to be a 2, 3, or 4 coming, a 3, 4, or 5 coming. But generally for an in-house in a house, you want to stay away from all windows, and you want to stay in the lowest floor in the innermost part of the house.
I think the general guidance is try to find a small interior room with
Yeah.
no windows, and that's where you shelter in place.
Okay, Holly Sullivan asks, wouldn't container homes be similar to trailers?
Yeah, see, I don't even know if they would allow container homes, because I mean, there's a building code that has to be followed. I don't think anyone has even really talked about having container homes in Hawaii. It's something that we could ask about, but I haven't heard about.
Dennis, I think there have been discussions about setting those up as potential homes for the houseless.
For the homeless, yeah. Yeah, okay, sure.
Okay. Jerry might have the answer to this question from Virginia Juntner. What are the requirements for a safe room?
Okay, well, first of all, FEMA has guidance on safe rooms that are out there. And the current building code for Honolulu also has specs for safe rooms. And, I'd start with those. But again, this is where an engineer comes in. You really should run any options that you're considering by a professional engineer.
Yeah, and for new homes right now, they have the option of a continuous load path and window protection, or a continuous load path connection and a safe room. And there are FEMA guidelines, like the walls, instead of being 5/8 inch plywood, they may be 3/4 inch plywood. And they'll have some ventilation requirements and exit and entry requirements. But there are, if you're interested, you could email me and I could send you some FEMA guidance on a safe room. Yeah, it's.
Okay, we have 2 similar questions. So I'll consolidate them. Why aren't house windows made of safety glass, which shatters in small round marbles, like what car windows have?
Well, let's see. It's all part of the building code again. And in Florida, and let me mention this, the impact resistant windows have 2 layers of tempered glass. So that the tempered glass is like the glass you're talking about in a car windshield that shatters in 2 small pieces. But to make impact resistant glass and impact resistant windows, it's 2 layers of tempered glass, and in between is a laminate film, and it's fused together in an oven to make it one strong piece. And then to make it pass the test, and this is why someone asked about masking tape. And to pass the test, they fire a 9-pound 2x4 at 34 miles per hour, and it has to hold the envelope. And then after that, it has to go through thousands of negative and positive pressure tests. So a window with masking tape will not pass the large missile test, but an impact resistant window will have the glass and the window frame tested together as one unit. And if you see the impact resistant windows, the window frames are almost like, they're really sturdy, and they're like, it's almost like, it's like almost like a 2-inch thick frame. And that is what's required now for any new house in Florida. And it's that type of protection is required for any new house in Hawaii. It could either be, impact resistant windows, or it could be some type of panel system such as plywood, or it could be a safe room. Yeah. But for a new house in Hawaii, that's what's required now. And many of the new houses require the impact resistant window, and that's essentially two tempered layers of glass and then a laminate in between, and they're fused together by heat. Yeah.
Okay, and Holly Sullivan had a question comment. I believe it's about container homes again. I think they have been discussed and installed for homeless and as an option for single people purchasing homes, but Jackie was kind enough to enter an answer in the chat. Per the internet, shipping container homes are legal in every county in the state of Hawaii, but rules made up by a specific neighborhood or homeowners association may have their own ideas on what is allowed. So be sure to check.
Sophia was just mentioning that there are actually a lot of container homes on the Big Island. So that's why I looked that up. It is legal.
Okay.
Then I saw that Jackie was typing an answer to Sherry Orr's question. Is there any help for low-income seniors to help fix up your house?
I was just going to mention that Habitat for Humanity has an essential home repair program that's grant funded. I'm not sure what's covered, but it is intended for low income older adults. So you could check with Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah. Okay, and for our, thank you participants for the good questions. We humbly ask that you complete our evaluation poll before you all depart, and I'll launch that poll right now. Make sure you scroll all the way down to answer all 3 questions on this evaluation poll. And while you're completing that, thank you to all of our participants for attending today. Thank you to Dennis and Jerry for their knowledge and expertise. Thank you to my co-pilot and navigator, Jackie Bolin. And we strongly encourage you to attend next week's webinar, which is for those who live in a high-rise, preparing for a hurricane. What do you do if you live in a high-rise? Again, thank you to all of our participants. To see all of AARP Hawaii's events, please go to aarp.org /HI. Have a wonderful, safe, and weekend all. Aloha. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jerry.
Aloha. Thank you, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you, Jackie.